Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tiana Davis, the Outreach Specialist with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. Our office investigates complaints of discrimination, combats human trafficking around the region, about which we will hear more about in just a few minutes, ensures equitable access to county government services for all people in the language of their preference, and educates on matters of civil rights and social justice importance. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another community conversation, brought to you in partnership between our office and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. With me today's co-host is Dr. Audrey Lau, the Adult and Senior Services Programming Specialist with the Library System. January is National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and this year marks 25 years since the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000 was signed into law. Human trafficking is a crime that happens in plain sight and that impacts our county and our region. The Office of Human Rights, through which the Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force operates, is committed to combating human trafficking and recognizes the incredible impact and importance of community and all of us in ending this traumatic crime. It is our pleasure to welcome Carmen Duran, the Domestic Violence and Human Trafficking Division Manager with the Prince George's County Department of Family Services, as our special guest for this community conversation. Carmen Duran previously served with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, where she played a pivotal role in establishing the human trafficking and elder exploitation units. These units not only addressed critical issues, but also served as a model for other prosecutorial agencies, showcasing best practices in victim support, prevention, and accountability. During her tenure, Carmen collaborated with community partners to create innovative programs aimed at raising awareness, supporting victims, and preventing exploitation. Carmen brings a unique blend of legal and healthcare expertise to her work. She holds a Juris Master's in healthcare law, a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and is also a licensed nurse. This diverse background has been integral in shaping her ability to address complex issues involving vulnerable populations with compassion and precision. Carmen, welcome. To get us started, thank you. Can you talk to us a bit about human trafficking generally? What is it? Where is it? What does that phrase human trafficking really mean?
Well, human trafficking is when you intentionally force someone to make money for you. I always say that that's the easiest definition. When you have to use force and coercion, manipulation to, basically encourage someone to either under labor trafficking or sex trafficking to make money for you. It is a crime. It is an arrestable offense, as you know.
It seems like there's a misunderstanding with what human trafficking is and what it isn't, and who can be a victim, who can be a perpetrator. Can you tell us, can you clarify some of the myths, the most popular myths?
Well, the most popular ones are basically a stranger kidnaps you. I was at a symposium today and they were warning about putting your children's names on buses, on your cars, on buses, for fear that a trafficker or a perpetrator will kidnap them and exploit them. A perpetrator can be anyone. A perpetrator can be a mother, a father, a stranger, a friend, a husband, a boyfriend. A victim can be anyone. A victim can be a child, an adult woman, an adult male, a minor child. The youngest victim that I've worked with was 11 years old, and she was trafficked for 6 years by her cousin. So there is no defining who the perp can be and who the victim can be. Anyone can be vulnerable to that type of exploitation.
Yeah, when I first sat through one of the human trafficking presentations that our office holds, I was very surprised about the ages. I didn't know that it was so common for people to be trafficked at such young ages. 11 years old, I think it was, for girls and 14 for boys.
Well, there's a certain innocence and vulnerability at that age. And if you're a child that has experienced some sort of loss or trauma in your life, you're open. You're open to someone coming to manipulate you, which is usually the case. Most of the cases that we had were cases where it was someone that supported them in every way possible, that meshed with them and developed a relationship with the victim. And then exploited them and made them feel guilty about not wanting to be exploited. And that's why our victims are with their perpetrators for such a long time. It's confusing, it's traumatic. And we used to call it the breadcrumb theory. They would beat you, but then they would slowly feed you breadcrumbs and love you and care for you. And that was how they manipulated you to continue working. And a lot of these children, go into adulthood as victims and develop relationships with their exploiters, and sometimes even have, family and children with their exploiters. We had so many cases where it started off as a romance and duly turned into an exploitive relationship that was violent and cruel. And, we usually get the naysayers who say, well, why didn't they just leave? Why don't they just leave? It's not that easy to leave when you're completely enmeshed by this person. We worked with girls who were dancers in clubs, and they had children, and their exploiters would sit outside in the car with their children and would not give the child back until our victims would give him or her money, the money that they made that evening. So they would hold babies hostages. It's difficult to get out of those situations, and that's what we're hoping, as we collaborate with these agencies in Prince George's County, is to a little bit more sensitivity to how important it is to provide the support that they need. And it's important to provide long-term support. We still work with our victims 15 years after recovery. It has to be continuous. It has to be ongoing. They have to maintain that support system. They don't trust many people in their lives. And once they do, as advocates, it's important that we continue to provide that.
Carmen, one of the things that the term human trafficking feels like it's relatively new. And I know that it's been around for a long time. It's had people have called it different things. Can you talk a little bit about why now, why lately we've used this terminology? Is it more helpful? Is it something that is just more politically correct, or what is the shaping of these terms?
The shaping of these terms, because they realized that women that were they called them prostitutes back then. They were in prostitution. They were beaten by their exploiters. Advocates came in. I remember in New York City, Hunts Point Market would go in to just give them water and sandwiches, and realize that they were being victimized, that they were on the job for someone else. And advocates decided to call it what it was. It was a crime. It was trafficking. It was against their will. That's where that came from. We don't use prostitution anymore. We use human trafficking victims. And, you may have women who are, we worked with women who wanted to be on the streets, who wanted to work. We weren't there to change their minds. We were there to give them options. So it's important to give individuals options as well, as advocates, to provide every option possible for our victims, even if they tell you that that's what they want to do, and even if they don't have an exploiter or a pimp working with them.
In the past few years, there's been a big jump in the amount of sex workers, and not just the amount of sex workers, but the amount of sex workers who are open and proud about being sex workers. What should we, like the everyday person who doesn't, work specifically in human trafficking, what should we look out for when it comes to differentiating between the sex workers and the people who are victims, or survivors, rather?
Well, once you're talking to someone who's a sex worker or someone who's being exploited, you're developing a trusting relationship with them. You're going to ask them those questions. And if it's someone who's very clearly is going to tell you that that's what they want to do, that's what they've chosen to do, we have to respect that. But you still provide the options and you give them your number, which is what I would do. Here's my number. Whenever you need anything, give me a call. And, surprisingly, eventually they would, because it's an exhausting way to live. Health-wise, we started a clinic in Miami. It was called the Thrive Clinic in University of Miami, a partnership with the University of Miami Medical Center. And that's what we offered women that were in the life who didn't want to be recovered. We offered them medical care. That to me as a nurse was very important. So we would refer them for medical care. And that's where the relationship started. That's where the relationship starts. So as advocates, we have to respect what people choose to do, but also make sure that it is a choice.
So in your course of work, do you ever have perpetrators who will sort of try to disrupt you while you're trying to help a victim? So like, say someone calling in with tips that may send your investigation in circles or something of that sort.
Well, let me share a story with you. Okay, we were at a group home for minors. I've worked many years with minor victims of HT, and I remember a knock on the door. This was a secure facility, and the knock on the door, when I opened it up, it was one of our young ladies' exploiter, pimp, who said, "I need my girl." And we didn't have any security. We didn't have any police. And we realized that we needed to take that on our own. And we said, no. And then he threatened us with guns, as they usually do. But you're not going to go to jail because, for a girl, because you can always replace that girl. And, that's what he said to me. He said, "I'll replace her with another one," and walked out. We were the state attorney's office. So we were convicting these perpetrators. And yes, they try to manipulate the victims as witnesses. They try to manipulate. They offered them many things. We had victims disappear because the pimps didn't want to do their time. We had a victim, unfortunately, a young lady who had been trafficked since the age of 12 and was with her exploiter for a very long time. And he murdered her. He murdered her in a field 2 days before she was set to go on the witness stand. So yes, they intervene, but most times they'll tell you that their girls can be replaced.
Can you talk a little bit about, because you have this amazing kind of resume with a Juris Master's in healthcare law, you've got criminal justice, you're a licensed nurse. How do all of these hats help you do your work in human trafficking?
The criminal justice, obviously, gave me the legal aspect of it. The Juris Master's in law, same, helps me understand the law. The nursing, I think, was the best one in what I did, because it was how we initially engaged our victims. It's important to take care of all of their needs and not just recover them. As advocates, we need to provide the options for all of their needs, because we don't want to be like pimps. We want to give people options. And I found that the medical aspect of it was the best one that we could offer. Take them to a doctor, get them checked out, give them that security. But yes, as an advocate, as a supervisor in a human trafficking unit, for such a big agency, you have to wear different hats. So, everything from private detective with our police officers to social work to sitting in a courtroom with one of our prosecutors as a co-chair. So things of that nature.
Do you think that by providing that empathy and that compassion, do you think that helps you prosecute cases better to get more help for people? It just seems like we've moved from a victim blaming to helping more victims. And I'm just curious if that you feel is more successful. I mean, not just from the point of view of we're getting convictions, but really helping people.
That's how we were able to build a specialized unit, because our detectives, who were initially not happy with what we were doing, and our prosecutors, who are just prosecutors, they're not social workers. Initially, when we recovered a girl, we would have them spend time with our detectives. We would have them spend time with our prosecutors. You need to get to know the person, and you have to have a level of empathy to do your job, even in a courtroom. And I think that's why we were so successful with our convictions. Because you humanize this person who was never humanized before. She was just, or he was just someone walking the streets. There was never any regard or respect for that person.
So your role, you work with domestic violence and you also work with human trafficking, and you're with the Department of Family Services. Can you talk about how domestic violence and human trafficking relate to each other, and how those things, specifically human trafficking, relate to family services?
Well, there's a real intersection between domestic violence and human trafficking. In actuality, I wrote a paper on it, on the severe forms used by both perpetrators in both crimes. There's the violence, there's the coercion, there's the intimidation, there's the isolation. So that's the power and control over your victims in both of these crimes. Domestic violence and human trafficking is part of this agency, Family Services, because they're intertwined. It's violence against women, it's violence against men. It's all under the violence code, which is what I always say. It's all violence. And as a matter of fact, I haven't spoken to, I'm not sure if our director is patched in, but I think it's important for us to even address violence against the elderly and exploitation against the elderly. So that's something else that I'd like to start looking at for this unit as well.
So we kind of skipped over the fact that you're new. So welcome to Prince George's County.
Thank you so much.
We kind of assume that you just sound so all the way connected. But can you talk a little bit about what your role is in Prince George's County specifically? We talked a little bit about where you're at and everything, but just go ahead and fill us in.
Okay, I oversee and I coordinate programs that provide support to survivors. We enhance prevention efforts and improve the county's response to human trafficking and domestic violence. It's basically a county-wide coordination. One of my primary responsibilities is to lead collaborative effort among law enforcement, service providers, healthcare professionals in the community, so we can have a unified response to human trafficking. I'm working on developing policies, implementing victim-centered services, and ensuring that the county remains proactive in addressing human trafficking.
So you mentioned Miami, and I'm just a little curious what you did well there that you think is going to help you here in Prince George's County, and what you'd like to do in this position.
We started new. The program in Miami was new. The state attorney realized that she couldn't prosecute cases because their victims would not cooperate. So we figured we needed a support system. I also figured that, you're not a very good prosecutor if the only thing you need is a witness. You should be able to find other evidence of the crime, which we work closely on, so we didn't have to expose our victims to the court system. Basically collaborating with the community, opening up healthcare centers, group homes, shelters specifically that would meet the needs of those victims. I don't know if you've heard of Camilla's House. Camilla's House is a very big shelter in Miami that consists of numerous shelters, and we were able to partner with them and open up shelters specifically for our victims. And it was very successful that they partnered with a culinary institute so our victims could go to school and learn culinary arts. And they thrived. They thrived with ongoing support. They thrived in that system. So that's what I did in Miami, was basically collaborating. I didn't want to just supervise, so I wanted also to work with victims. So I wore two hats. I was supervisor and I was also called a victim specialist. So whenever there were recoveries, whenever we needed to have someone who wasn't law enforcement with our victims, they would call the victim specialist. I'm very proud of that as well.
So when you say you offer people options, what are some of those options? What are the types of things that when you talk to people who are just in the depths of a situation they feel like they can't get out of, what can you offer them?
Well, let's just assume that we're talking about someone who's newly recovered and has decided that she wants to leave her exploiter. That's not what she wants to do. By options is, housing. Where would you like to live? I believe in a rest period. So we would ask all of our service providers, all of our partners, to allow our victims at least 6 months of rest and recuperation. See a doctor on a regular basis. And then decide options: schooling, housing. Would you like to leave the state? We wouldn't. I don't believe it's our responsibility to tell our victims what to do. We can also offer them the options and let them choose, and we support those choices.
I think we do have a question from the audience. It says, it's interesting some victims don't realize they are victims. How can we teach educators specifically about the signs? Because the trafficking happens also in schools.
Yes, it does. We had many cases in many of our high schools in Miami. As an educator, the signs are. I'm going to give you some examples. Either a young lady, let's say it's a young lady. She's your student. She comes in exhausted in the morning. She falls asleep in class. She doesn't focus. She has to leave before the bell rings because there's someone outside waiting for her. She misses days of school. Sometimes she's unkept. Sometimes she comes in work clothes. Isolated, doesn't have many friends. And if she does have a friend, this friend is also enmeshed with this exploiter. So you can't confront them. You can't openly tell a victim. But what you do is that you start building a trusting verbal relationship with them. That's what you do. And it may take you a long time. But that's what we did. We had a group of young ladies who were being exploited in a high school. And it was the librarian who figured out that they were being exploited because they would sneak out of the library and leave with a young man every day at 3:00. They would come back the next day exhausted. They would sleep in class. And this amazing librarian started talking to the girls, and Julie then discovered that they were being exploited and that he had threatened to tell their parents that they were out partying and working, and they didn't want their parents to know. So as a teacher, and I have so much respect for teachers and for people who work in schools, because you're exposed. This is you're going to see what we don't see initially. And it's important that you engage your students and talk to them and build a trusting relationship with them. And if they're going to leave, they're going to leave, but they know that they can always come back and share with you and talk to you and not be shocked by anything that they tell you. You cannot be shocked. I find that a lot of people cringe at the stories, and you can't, because it's their reality.
What makes the youth so vulnerable to human trafficking?
Oh, goodness. We've all been teenagers. We've all had the vulnerabilities of being a teenager. And now with social media, of not looking as wonderful as the girls on social media, of not being that man. So the insecurities, and with insecurities come depression and isolation. And when you're isolated, you're open to anyone making you feel good online. And that's how most of these pimps, exploiters, coerce kids. They hear from this person what they don't hear from anyone else. You're beautiful. Oh, you're gorgeous. What a handsome man you are. You must drive the girls crazy and things of that nature. And you see it. You see it all the time when kids run away with people that they meet online. So the vulnerabilities of being a teenager, of not feeling good about yourself, of having problems at home, lack of support at home, financial difficulties at home. There's a long list of reasons why you would be vulnerable and open to that.
You talk about young women, but we also know that young men can be trafficked. Now, is there a difference in what that looks like and reasons why, or just is there any way to kind of...
It's exactly the same. What's sad is that there's such a stigma attached to it, and males are so they're not cooperative. They're not open. They don't disclose. Whereas as women do, the men do not. So it's what goes on behind closed doors. It's very, very frightening with men and members of the LGBTQ community as well. In this political arena that we're at now, there's a real lack of support politically for those groups. I'm grateful that we still have our advocates and the people that do the kind of work that we do, obviously, that won't be influenced by what's going on around us, and will be there for our victims.
One of our viewers has added this, and I want to talk a little bit about this. Thankfully, we are mandated reporters. She's a teacher. Not only do we want to report, but it's our responsibility. Who are our mandatory reporters? Because a lot of people think that librarians are, and they're not in some areas. So can you talk a little bit about who is a mandatory reporter and what that looks like?
A mandatory, it's anyone who works in a realm with children, teachers, anyone who's exposed to children, nurses, doctors, teachers, social workers, anyone who works with kids and teenagers. Really, librarians are not?
No, not in all areas. We are not. And it's when I took the training, I was a little shocked myself. But I think that a lot of people need to know who isn't as much as who is, because we can say something, and a lot of times that comes down to your own ethics, but it's really difficult to kind of get that kind of mandatory reporting, across certain jobs. So I think it's a really interesting who does and who doesn't. I have a mother who worked in a hospital for many years, and she was often calling. But can you talk a little bit about how important it is?
Oh, it's so important. Chances are, let's take the example of a victim who goes into an emergency room. You may never, ever see that victim again, ever. So it's so important to make that call. And, if it's a minor victim, here it's CPS. In the state of Florida, it's DCF. Here would be CPS. But if it's an adult, you're morally mandated. May I say that? You're morally mandated to make that call to law enforcement. Just if you see something, say something. But I find that nurses and hospital workers are wonderful when it comes to doing that. Even with adult patients that come in, they're willing to separate them. And even in domestic situations, separate them from the perpetrator and ask those important questions, and make sure that you don't let them leave until you know that they're safe.
How do we talk to youth about human trafficking, like how to avoid becoming victims, how to spot something with their friends, just overall awareness? How do we engage the youth?
Training. There's so many trainings available now. I think it's important for schools to have their students trained, to watch videos, to bring in speakers. You educate and you inform. And you don't stop. You don't stop. You do it regularly with all your classes. That's very important. I think school training, churches as well. I think it's important for churches to train their youth, to train their members on a regular basis, to make sure that they're not exposed to anything that they can't handle, to teach them, to give them the tools to be able to handle. Our children spend a lot of time online. You have to make them aware of what can happen when you talk to strangers. That's very important. So awareness and training on all levels.
Before you ask your next question, I just want to follow up. You talked a little bit about churches, and I know a lot of, during the summer in particular, we have a lot of camps, a lot of vacation Bible school, things like that. How can parents be better prepared for those? What kind of questions should they be asking when their children are going to camps and to activities and things like that that aren't maybe necessarily completely connected with their school?
You ask the questions as honestly, and you inform your children as honestly as possible. And I say this all the time. You go into your children's phone, you go into your children's computer, you parent. It's important to parent. Used to work with an FBI agent who used to say, if your kid's on social media, then you've just opened your front door to every stranger to come to your house. And I truly believe that. So you ask the questions that you have to. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse when I was a child. So I raised my children asking the questions that needed to be asked. Stranger danger, how did he make sure no one touches you inappropriately? You have to be honest. We're living in those times where you have to be honest with your kids. And it's not just strangers, it's family, it's friends. No one should love your kid more than you. And if you have someone, whether it's a teacher or anyone who's just showing interest that you don't feel comfortable with, follow that instinct.
I know my mom was really big about teaching us the right words. And we had an uncle who was not a good person. And it was through a conversation that my sister had and a few interactions that my mother kind of, and, things, we got him off and out of no more children would be hurt by him. But it was really, as a child, I remember thinking, Mom, I can't believe you want me to say that word. But it's not about their feelings, and it's not about their embarrassment. And I'm really thankful that I had a mother who told us and protected us, because there's a lot of people, I think, who think it's not going to happen to my kid. It's not in my family. It's not in my neighborhood. And I think what you're telling us is that it really is.
It's everywhere. And we know that. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but your parents, it's that strength that's so important.
Go ahead, Tiana. I think we just lost video. Yep, we're good.
We lost you there for a second. Just keep an eye on your children, keep an eye on your teens, keep an eye on each other, because anyone can be victimized.
We've spoken about what to look out for how to identify it when it's happening with someone. Can we talk about what happens after the fact? So these survivors are no longer in the life. What does a survivor look like, so to speak? How can I better ask this question? What are they going through? What are some things that you can sort of be aware of when it comes to someone who's left the life, that can help their transition back into society? Yeah.
Not only society, into their own humanity, right? Into their own feeling of worth. Initially, our victims are very guarded. They will always be guarded. They will always be distrustful. And that's their survival skill. And that's okay, because they'll heal on the, people heal at their own time. And I remember working with a victim who said clearly to me, I can never go back to my childhood. She had been abused and then exploited by a family member. And she said, I can never get that back. So how do I move forward? And we were talking about, well, what did you like? What things in your childhood that brought you joy? And she mentioned things, like bike riding and the innocence of that. And I asked her to find that again. Find that in your life. Find that joy. And she did. And what she did was that she enrolled in school and became an attorney. She became an attorney. As a matter of fact, she went to Georgetown Law, and she found the joy in prosecuting the bad guys, right? And that's how she healed in her life. I mean, her story is amazing, but just such trauma, and she was able to turn it around. So find what brings you joy and let it flourish, and make sure that your support system is helping you reach that. Because it's very hard to do that on your own without therapy, without loved ones around you. It's very hard to accomplish that on your own.
I can jump in again. What can the everyday, like, lay person who wants to be involved in, or not involved, but who wants to help with human trafficking, what can the everyday person do?
I would suggest that they sign up with an organization. You need training to do this. You can't just jump into this, right? There's a certain person that you have to be able to do this without any judgment. So just, volunteer with an organization who's going to provide the training that you need. But just volunteer work is ideal. But you need the training before you do that.
One of the facts that surprised me when I first sat in on a training was just how accessible human trafficking is in this area in particular, because of the highway system and how easy it is to get in and out.
Yes.
Is it the same in Miami, because we're both on that I-95 corridor, or is there something specific about this area?
About this area, you have a lot of truckers, you have a lot of truck stops, you have 95, you have a lot of gang activity in Prince George's County as well. Miami is the go-to place because of the weather, right? So you can have your victims can walk the streets, your victims can post, and the weather's not a factor. And it's also where everyone goes to vacation. So you have, and I call them Johns. There's a lot of Johns that go to Miami to find victims. Here you have a lot of truckers and a lot of runaways here in Prince George's County.
So when we talked really, really early on, and we talked about this being a crime, what kind of What do those criminal trials look like? Not just for the time that someone serves, but also for the process of the victim having to go through literally possibly re-traumatizing them. How do you help them prepare for trial? How do you help them through that process?
What's wonderful and not wonderful at times about the judicial court system is that it takes a long time to get to trial, right? A lot of our cases were pled out because our victims were willing to testify. Yes, it's preparation. It's preparation, but most of our victims, once they did testify, were on another level in their lives. They were empowered, they were strong, they realized that they were victimized, and they were ready. They were ready. But during our trials, we strategically placed ourselves where our victims could look at us and not the defendant. It was a unit of people there for her. I remember we had a case where the defendant was looking at life in prison for trafficking a 12-year-old who he proceeded to tattoo her eyelids when she ran away. And she decided that she was going to testify. And we sat her up on the chair, and we all sat there, and we told her, just look at us. Don't look at him. And the defense attorney, I don't quite remember what he said to her, but she said, I'm here because my peeps are here. And she started naming all of us. And that gave her strength, that she realized she wasn't alone. And she, victim is now an adult who continues to reach out to her peeps because we've become her, her support system. And he's doing life because the jury came back in 20 minutes with a verdict. So it's not always like that. Sometimes our witnesses, our victims do not want to testify, and we can't move forward, and they go free. But defendants don't stop what they're doing because they get arrested. So they keep doing it, and they keep getting arrested, and they go from state to state exploiting vulnerable individuals. It's different for every victim, for every crime. It looks very, very different.
We have a question from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and put it up here. Do minors serve as perpetrators, or are they considered victims as well, particularly with gang families and crews, as they're called here?
That's a very good question. We had a case that was gang related, and there were 7 of them, and they recruited yes, they were traffickers, and they were duly arrested on a juvenile level as traffickers. We had a lot of girls, and I say girls because I never saw this with the males. We had a lot of girls who became bottoms, and a bottom is basically someone who recruits for the pimp. And I remember a minor telling me, Miss Carmen, the reason I do it, and I feel sorry for these girls, but the reason that I do it is because it keeps me off my back. And I thought that was so significant that she said that. She was protecting herself. And yes, she was a victim. She was being victimized as a bottom. But yes, our minors do exploit because many of them are given no other choice but to do that. And it's a survival, If you can be like your pimp, you're on the same level. He's not going to beat you. You're going to be important to him. But in the process, you have to recruit other girls or other boys to work for him.
It's just amazing to me that we ban books for talking about things that kids really should know. There are kids out there who are living really hard lives. And, I think that when we know that children are going through these things, other children need to be aware that it's possible that could happen to them if they're not careful.
That's why it's important to keep them informed. And, we've banned in the state of Florida, the governor has banned so many very important books. But the teachers are, still informing their children in after hours clubs, after school clubs. You need to keep them informed. It's important. Any which way you can.
I guess from a library perspective, I'm going to ask the question. So are there resources that your office can share with us, with other public places and offices, institutions to help grow awareness and help protect those who are affected or vulnerable? I know that we often do a lot of informational kind of programs for the public. But I just wondered if there are resources that we should be keeping around, and maybe even you talked about books. Are there any books that we need to be making sure we have on our shelves or in a place where the right people can see them and can access them?
There's many books. I mentioned GEMS earlier. GEMS is a program in New York City, and they purposely have books that the cover is something totally different than what the material is inside. And I will send you a list, and you can also send it to your viewers. I'll send you a list of things that you can have on hand as a resource. If you get a call, if someone just wants to give their kids something to read as a start to a conversation, because it should always be the start of a conversation. But I will send you a list of what I have and what we have here. Okay?
That would be great. And if we can coordinate that, for all of our libraries, that would be wonderful. We have another question. Tiana, do you want me to read it, or you're good? Does Law and Order SVU show an accurate depiction of sex crimes and the policing aspect?
One of my favorite shows, by the way, but most of their shows are based on real stories in the media. They may enhance things and change things around a bit, but yes, most of the storylines are taken right out of the news. But again, it's Hollywood, so.
Earlier, you spoke about how people or survivors, when they go to testify, a lot of times they can feel a little more confident. Is there a training that happens for them between the time where they are rescued to the time where they go to testify? Or what happens in that time span?
What do you mean by training?
I guess training is a bad word, but like an education and explanation of why what they went through is considered trafficking, why it's wrong, how they're going to be okay, like what options they have in the future, things of that nature. Something that helped to build their confidence to get them to the point where they felt okay to testify.
Well, yeah, from the moment that they're recovered, they have a whole slew of support system of social workers, of advocates, of medical staff, of people that are there exclusively to take care of their immediate needs. And like I said earlier, that's ongoing. It doesn't stop. That empowers individuals. That empowers them because you're making them feel special and wonderful, and you're showing them that you can truly trust someone. And that's what empowers them. When they realize that they can reach a goal, that they can graduate from high school, that they can go to college, that they were fully capable all along to be able to do that, that enlightens them to just be strong. And that's what would happen. They would be strong and felt good about themselves and were angry that they were being taken advantage of. And most importantly, didn't want this individual to continue to do that. But again, it's ongoing. It's ongoing therapy and support. That can't stop after prosecution, can't stop after recovery. It needs to continue. And it needs to be collaborative.
We have another question. Can you speak to the intellectually disabled and the prominence of cases within human trafficking?
We've had a few cases as well. And yes, very prominent, especially in group homes. That's been my experience. I'm not sure about Princess George's County, but that was my experience where we had a group home for the intellectually disabled children, and they were being exploited by a case manager in the facility. But yes, it is prevalent. And what's very, very sad is that they didn't disclose. It was discovered by another worker that these children were being taken advantage of by this individual. But yes, this crime exists everywhere, in every aspect of our lives, in hospitals, in nursing homes. Domestic violence, sexual abuse, human trafficking can happen anywhere, to anyone.
You talked about the fact that you work with a lot of different agencies. Can you talk about why it's so important to have all these agencies working together? Who are these agencies and how do they work together?
These agencies, because they each provide something different. You have your agencies that provide housing. You have your agency that provides education. So without the collaboration, one entity can't do that on their own. It has to be a community effort. But schools, social work agencies, churches, any agency that provides a service, we need to engage. But the solution has to be collaborative.
Does the Department of Family Services have programming or training or anything that's available to the public to join so that they can learn more about human trafficking?
That's what I'm working on, ladies. I've only been here 2 months. Yes, that's what I want to develop. I want to develop training programs. I want to develop, programs. I want to go out into the community and talk to people. But that's what I'm working on. So I will keep you informed. And that way you can, tell your listeners and your viewers.
We have a lot of branches who would be more than happy to take some training.
And I'd be very excited about doing that for you.
Well, we don't have a lot more time, but I want to ask you, because Tiana and I are very, even still now, very new at learning about a lot of this. Is there anything specific that you really want everyone out there to know today? Kind of some way that they can go away from this program and feel like they've done something proactive, or maybe invest in their children or invest in their community. Just anything that you think that we haven't covered yet.
Well, you know what? Just the fact that you logged in to listen to this is a start. As I said earlier, ending human trafficking requires a collaborative effort from the community, from service providers, from law enforcement. As you educate yourself, educating yourself is a start. Doing the work is a start. But that's all it's about. It's about educating yourself, educating your children. Make this a topic of conversation at the dinner table. I know everyone here has Netflix and Prime, but there are some wonderful documentaries on human trafficking that they're age appropriate for teenagers, that you can sit down and it starts a conversation. But we have to make sure that no one falls through the cracks as a community, right? It's important. It's our responsibility. It's our moral responsibility and we can make a difference. We definitely can make a difference if we work hard enough. We can.
So how many years have you been doing this job, and how do you keep yourself not only focused, but take care of your mental health?
Yoga. Yoga. I've been doing this. I started doing this before this was something to be done, right? I started doing this when I was in my 20s. So I've been doing this for a good 40 years. before human trafficking was a thing, right? Before any of this came to light, I worked with victims. I've always had a soft spot for women that were being taken advantage of. I always figured they were being taken advantage of. And we've come such a long way. We really have. I think we're very proud of the work that we've done legislatively, as well as advocates and social workers. We've done good work on behalf of these victims.
How do you recommend people to grow their, I know we tell people to read, to grow your empathy, but how do you help the people you meet who may or may not know anything about this? How do you grow their empathy from this, like we talked about, these words like prostitute and like very pointed? How do you help them grow that empathy to look at women as people not only who are being exploited, who are probably going through hell and a half at this moment? How do you help people out there kind of grow compassion and empathy?
If it's someone who's interested in growing, they will do it. Not everyone is interested in the growth. Not everyone is interested in this issue. But reading, volunteering, go do that training and sit down and talk to someone who's a survivor. But you have to have the heart for it. So if they're not already educating themselves, right? If there's that interest isn't there, then I don't think we can engage them. I really don't. I think the people that are in it now are going to be the change makers.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Carmen, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for doing what you do. Same to DFS, same to the Human Trafficking Task Force. Thank you all so much for doing what you do. For those watching, you can learn more about the Human Trafficking Task Force by visiting our website at civilrights.mypgc.us and navigating to the Human Trafficking tab. You are also welcome to call our office at 301-883-6170 and ask for the task force administrator. We appreciate you spending your time with us and hope to see you at one of our many upcoming programs. Please also check out our friends at the library at pgcmls.info/events to see all of the upcoming things they have going on for the community. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.